Okay, we're ready to be joined with the media. If you could make sure that we are Joe and let us know audibly when that's happened.
Thank you. You're joined with the media now. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's availability. We have with us today Jonathan Boyd, a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. He'll be doing a presentation about the latest snow conditions and water supply bulletin and snowpack conditions in BC. If you're a member of the media and you have a question, please press *1 to enter the queue for your chance to ask a question and a follow-up. With that, I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. So once again, my name's Jonathan Boyd. I'm a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. I'll speak to Dave for about maybe 10 to 12 minutes or so. Just for the spelling purposes, it's Jonathan and Boyd. Today I'm joining from the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. So this morning, the River Forecast Center released the April 1st Snow Survey and Water Supply Bulletin. It is now available on the River Forecast Center website. It's 26 pages and lists all of the snow basin indices across the province and historical data at every individual snow site across the province. The April 1st Snow Bulletin is considered the premier bulletin for assessing the year's seasonal snowpack and for comparing historical years. Typically by April 1st, about 95% of the seasonal snow has accumulated, with the peak occurring mid-month. It is possible for snowpack to continue to climb into May if it is a cold and wet spring. This past fall and winter, we were under El Nino conditions. El Nino is a sea surface temperature anomaly in the equatorial Pacific that can influence climate in BC. Typically under El Nino conditions, winters are warmer than normal, and sometimes they can be drier than normal. This snow accumulation season followed these expected El Nino conditions with very low snowpack measured across the province for the 3 previous bulletins on January, February, and March 1st. As of April 1st, the average of all snow measurements across BC is 63% of normal, dropping from March 1st when the value was 66% of normal and significantly lower than last year when April 1st, 2023 was 88% of normal. The 63% of normal for the province on April 1st is the lowest since 1970. Just previously, the low years were 2015, which was 66% of normal, 1981, 68%, and in 1977, it was 70% of normal. Just noting that 1977 was the lowest for March 1st. It was about, I think, 53% of normal. So we were hoping for that kind of recovery this past month and obviously didn't get it. I've stated the lowest since 1970, and the reason is that it's just not possible to say the lowest ever because the data just doesn't exist. Snow surveys began in BC in the 1930s for water management reasons in areas in the interior and lower mainland like Aberdeen Lake, Nelson, Brookmere, Grouse Mountain, and McCulloch. The BC snow program increased significantly after the major spring floods in 1948, and then again further after flooding in 1972. And then over that time, additional snow measurement sites were started for hydroelectric facilities in the Kootenay-Columbia region, the Bridge, the South Coast, Vancouver Island, Nechako, and Peace. So a thorough comparison for the full province can really only go back to about 1970 just to have enough stations. However, when looking at individual stations across the province, we can compare to the historic record. For April 1st, 28 of those snow sites measured the record low snow water equivalent for April 1st, and that's about 18% of the measurements this year. These were scattered throughout the province in the Upper Fraser East, the Nechako, the Bridge, the Quesnel, North Thompson, South Thompson, Upper Columbia, West Kootenay, Okanagan, Peace, Skeena Nass, and Liard. It was quite widespread, and a complete list of each of those stations is available in the bulletin. Most notable of these regions is the Quesnel region in the Cariboo, where 3 out of 4 sites measured their record low, with the other station measuring the second lowest. So the snowpack is extremely low in the Cariboo, and that's the Quesnel and Williams Lake area. Just another area of note, the Skeena Nass region measured 7 record lows, with 5 of them having over 50 years of record. This region encompasses the Bulkley River as well. So that's kind of the Terrace Smithers region. Just interestingly, some of the regions with the lowest snow basin indices from a percent of normal perspective did not actually measure any lowest records. So this is including the South Coast, which is at 53% of normal, and Vancouver Island at 49% of normal for April 1st. The lowest year recorded for these regions was 2015, when the South Coast was 13% of normal and Vancouver Island was 15% of normal for April 1st. So the snowpack is considerably higher than it was in 2015 on the island and the lower mainland. And just as a further example for that, Grouse Mountain manual snow survey in North Vancouver has continuous snow measurements for April 1st dating back to 1936, just with the one exception being the 2020 pandemic year where it wasn't safe to go out and do it. This year's value of 818 millimeters snow water equivalent is about 66% of normal. So it's below normal, but it's still the 18th lowest in the last 89 years. It's not record low. And as an example, 2015, it was 0 millimeters for that site. Just another region of note across the province is the Chilcotin that measures 0% for the April 1st snow basin index. This region only has 2 lower elevation manual snow surveys within its boundaries. So it's common for these stations to actually be snow-free on April 1st if it's a warm March. And a better indicator of the seasonal snowpack for the Chilcotin is actually the March 1st snow basin index, which was 67% of normal. At the River Forecast Center, we calculate an additional snow basin index for the Fraser River at Hope, accounting for the influence of upstream tributaries in the river. So it's actually weighted based on how much flow comes from each watershed upstream. This year, the Fraser River at Hope snow basin index is 61% of normal, which, like the province, it's the lowest since 1970. The forecast peak flow for the Fraser at Hope is 6,200 cubic meters per second, plus or minus a couple thousand, which really has no flood concerns for the lower Fraser Valley in comparison with years where the snowpack is very high. So what that low snowpack means is the flood hazard from snowmelt this year is low, and it's especially noticeable for the larger systems, like I mentioned, with the Fraser River or the Thompson River, the Skeena River. A silver lining, of course, of this low snowpack is that areas that have been impacted consistently by flooding in recent years will have a lower risk this spring. It is still possible for adverse weather to cause flooding in the spring. Sudden and extreme rainfall or persistent periods of heavy rainfall can still cause flooding, especially smaller, medium-sized rivers in the interior. The spring is typically the wet season for the interior. The Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness has a webpage called Get Prepared for Floods. It's important for anyone who lives near rivers and creeks to still be prepared for that possibility of flooding this spring, especially from rainfall, and again, especially in the interior. As expected with low snowpack, the seasonal volume forecasts are generally below normal to well below normal for systems like Okanagan Lake and Nicola Lake. The current low provincial snowpack, the persistence of drought impacts from previous seasons, and the upcoming seasonal weather outlook are all significant factors for a province-wide concern for drought this year. Low snowpack and increased likelihood of early and accelerated snowmelt may contribute to an early shift in the timing of the streamflow runoff, with the influence of snowmelt runoff diminishing earlier than normal. It is anticipated that many regions may experience daily streamflow rates that are outside of the historical range of flows by that date, with shifts earlier than normal for the season. Early melt is already being observed in low to mid elevation snowpack, with streamflow in many areas above normal for early April due to this early shift in snowmelt. The degree to which an early snowmelt might impact BC stream flow will be better understood over the upcoming month, and with the snow measurements that are done for the May 1st snow bulletin. The causes of drought in BC are multifaceted. While snowpack can play an important role in areas, other factors such as the rate of snowmelt, the spring and summer temperatures, short and long-term precipitation trends, they may all have equal or greater importance in the emergence of drought this summer. And just as an example of that, in 2019, that was our last full El Nino season. It was the last time that the snow bulletin showed below normal across BC. It was 78% of normal, so healthier than this year, but still below normal. It was a rapid melt, a very warm May. The province was preparing and expecting one of the worst, if not the worst, drought season to come, with dry conditions lasting through June. And then very late in June, the rains arrived and we had a very cold and wet summer season. And unfortunately, significant flooding in areas like the Chilcotin or high stream flow advisories on the south coast and the North Thompson. But it did help us miss the potential of a major drought in 2019. And then conversely, in 2022, the snowpack was actually quite healthy. We had a La Nina year that year, which led to a delay of the snow melt. So by June 1st, the provincial average was a whopping 165% of normal. There really were no expected drought concerns. However, about maybe July 8th or 9th, the rains just stopped that year and essentially didn't arrive until late October. And the drought impacts didn't show up until September and October of that year, but it can still happen even in high snow years or delayed snowmelt years. So it's still just a little bit too early to say with definity that we will for sure have a major drought this year. So just to summarize, the provincial average is 63% of normal. It's the lowest average for the province since 1970 at least. Generally, the April 1st bulletin is the benchmark bulletin that we use to compare year to year, but snow can still accumulate through April and even into May. The May 1st bulletin is the final thorough bulletin where seasonal volume forecasts and widespread manual snow survey measurements are included. It's scheduled to be released on May 9th and will provide a further update to the seasonal snow levels. Additional bulletins later on are primarily based on the automated snow weather stations, and those occur for May 15th, June 1st, and June 15th. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'll pass it back to Tara to moderate.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue for your chance to ask a question and a follow-up. We'll start in the Southern Interior today with Michael Potestio at Castanet. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Just wanted to see if you could talk a little more specifically about Thompson snow basins for the north and south here. We've seen the south has come down quite significantly. The flood risk still expected to be minimal, and should we expect to stay in high drought levels moving forward?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Michael, for the questions. So the North Thompson Snow Basin Index for April 1st is 71% of normal. And as you say, it dropped by 5 percentage points compared to March 1st. And the South Thompson is 79% of normal, dropping by 11 percentage points. It's really interesting to see the different variety and variability of the snowpack throughout the province. So the lower mainland and Vancouver Island can have values as low as 13%, but as high as 200% of normal for April 1st. The North and South Thompson don't necessarily vary that much. So even though the South Thompson is at the 79th percentile, there was a station that was recording the record low there. So from a percentile perspective, it is very low. What that means, of course, is that the potential for flood is quite low for the Thompson. So anything upstream of Kamloops, so the Shuswap Lake, the North Thompson River, McClure, the Salmon River, there's always the potential for rain events to affect smaller tributaries, smaller creeks and rivers. but from the bigger perspective, it'll be more of a low flow situation that will be the concern. From a drought level perspective, the drought levels, how they work is that they usually begin after we've gone through the snow melt period, and then they're managed throughout the late spring, summer, and into fall, and last year even kind of lingering almost to the start of winter. So technically it's not really updated through the winter or early spring. My understanding is that there may be the first update in approximately 3 weeks or so. I don't know that with absolute certainty. So it still is always a little bit premature to set a drought level just based on the snow right now until we've actually gone through the melt season. But only time will tell, and we'll see what happens over the next maybe 3 to 4 weeks in terms of temperatures. Ideally, what we'd like is kind of what's happening over the past maybe 10 days or so, which is seasonal temperatures with a little bit of precipitation, and there has been some seasonal accumulation that's occurred over the first week of April.
Follow up, Mike?
Yeah, and just based on what you guys have seen so far, is there anything you can say about the potential impact here on fire season? Like you mentioned, there was the El Nino a few years back. We still managed to have a fairly high stream flow anyway.
Yeah, and this is really just listening into my colleagues at BC Wildfire Service, where I have heard them present that the snowpack is just one part of the story there, and a big aspect is the May and June precipitation, or as I highlighted with 2019, which was precipitation that lingered even into July and August. Typically speaking, drought and wildfire go hand in hand. So it's not setting up to be a great season, but it still just depends on what the weather conditions are. If we have last year's spring weather conditions this year, it will be worse from a drought perspective. Wildfire, of course, is so unique because it really depends on lightning strikes or sometimes, unfortunately, from human-caused fires, and every location is a little bit more unique.
Our next question comes from Penny Dathlos, CTV.
Hi there. Thanks very much for taking my question. These are alarming numbers, especially in the Lower Mainland. So I'm just wondering, from a practical perspective, the difference from last year compared to this year. Are you foreseeing any more severe watering restrictions, for example, or what kind of, I suppose, practical impacts do you think that this level of snowpack is going to have on people, particularly in the Lower Mainland?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Penny. Yeah, I would say, I mean, from a water restriction side, the best is to actually check in with Metro Vancouver for that, and any of the city's kind of water utilities and water supplies, just because they will have their own specific sets in terms of when water restrictions may or may not occur. Just as an example, I'm in Victoria, and the CRD, the Capital Regional District, manages the Souk Lake Reservoir for water supply here. And it's not necessarily snow sourced. It's primarily rainfall. And it's my understanding that over the winter, it did fill up to full capacity there. So I don't know exactly on the setup for the Vancouver reservoirs, but it hasn't necessarily been an incredibly dry winter and fall for the Lower Mainland. The big story for that area was that just the temperatures were a little bit warmer than normal. So much of the precipitation fell as rain as opposed to snow. What snow offers is it offers that bit of extra storage, which means that in terms of releasing water, using water, that water can still stay available to flow into a reservoir later into the season. And especially with the higher elevations, that can linger into June, July, and even August sometimes that year. So there may be challenges. It's going to be on a case-to-case basis. But from the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island perspective, it is low, but it's still nowhere near as drastically low as 2015. So those areas will have experience for managing that particular year.
Penny, do you have a follow-up?
I do. You'd mentioned that the rate of snowmelt, for example, can have a really big impact on the drought. And, like when we've got that much snow kind of waiting in reserve, it can be helpful. So I'm just curious if the province has ever explored any possibility of trying to preserve that snow a little bit longer. I know in the Alps, they've used blankets to try to insulate those glaciers over the years to try to preserve those. Has the province ever looked at anything to try to keep the snow lasting a little bit longer so we can count on that melt coming a little bit later when we might need it?
Unfortunately, I just don't think the possibility exists. Speaking to like the glaciers in the Alps, that might be at a very localized level, but just the sheer size of British Columbia, and the scale, kind of the lack of population compared to Europe, which is more densely populated, it would be a difficult thing to set up for the province here. It is just one of the challenges is that we're always at the mercy of the weather. And if we get too much precipitation in the wintertime, that can lead to flooding. So we didn't get as much this year. There was far less in terms of concerns for floods from that perspective. But now we're in a case where we want kind of that cool temperatures to exist through April and May to delay the snow melt. And that's really the only thing that I can see is just it's a wait and see progress.
Our next question comes from Andrew McLeod, the Tyee.
Yeah, hi. Throughout the presentation, you talked about normal. I was hoping you could just tell us how you define normal.
Oh, yeah. So the normal period that we're using is from 1991 to 2020.
Yeah, but is that, so is it an average, or like it sounds to me like there was a lot of variability. So I'm just wondering, like, is that a 10-year average or an average over the whole time, or how, like what's the definition of normal?
Right. Yeah. So the normal that we're using is from 1991 to 2020 for each individual station. And there is variability within every station. So some of the automated stations might have only been built 15 to 20 years ago. So unfortunately, we only have 15 to 20 years of that data. But we do use that as the average for that. There are some regions like, say, I mentioned Grouse Mountain, which had a complete record except 2020. So it has data from 1991 all the way to 2019. So that's 29 years of data. The challenge with the Snowpack measurements is that our automated stations can always have malfunction issues with the equipment or transmitting issues. From the manual snow survey perspective, a lot of the challenges can come down to just accessing the location during the surveying period, say from weather-related challenges if they need helicopter access or for dangers from avalanches. So it's not always as simple as an apples to apples comparison. And it is really tricky because every individual site, whether it's an automated or manual station, has a complete different record. And within the bulletin, we use the percent of normal just because that's been the standard that we've used over the past 50 years or so, as well as that's what the US is doing with the Northwest River Forecast Center. Within the bulletin, in the data tables, we do have a percent of historical record, and that's, percentile of historical record. So that's using the entire period of record for every station. So again, it is challenging. It's just not quite as thorough as, say, our climate stations, that a lot of them are located at airports and might have continuous records every day for the last 120 to 140 years. The snow measurements are pretty patchy and choppy, and sometimes, unfortunately, even stations have to get moved because of wildfire or for sometimes they're accidentally logged.
And for the next question, we go.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Andrew. Okay,
was that two questions?
They were related. Let's have another follow-up, and then we're going to go to Darren Bain. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Tara. And this may be out of what you can tell me, but I'm wondering, with the low snowpack, what are the consequences for hydro producers?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is that with lower snowpack, it is going to be a challenge, I think, for specific areas. I just refrain from kind of stepping on the toes of those areas. So there's many throughout the province, and the best is to actually check in with each of those individuals. So that would be obviously BC Hydro, but then Rio Tinto up in the Nechako, and then Fortis BC with Kootenay Lake, and potentially just smaller independent power producers, which I believe there are many throughout the province.
Okay, now we'll go
Thank
to.
you.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll go to the north now. Well, central, I guess. Prince George, Darren Bain, MyPG now. Go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for taking my questions today. Could you just go into a little bit more detail around the Prince George area, specifically the Upper Fraser East and West?
Yeah. Hi, Darren. Yeah, nice to hear from you. Yeah, so the Upper Fraser East is coming in at 56% of normal. So that's a decline from, or pardon me, that's actually one of the areas that did increase from 52% of normal for March 1st. And then the Upper Fraser West is at 70% of normal, dropping from 79% of normal for March 1st. So although the Upper Fraser East did bump up a little bit, it wasn't necessarily a substantial increase. The average of percentiles for those stations that make up the Snow Basin Index is just 2. So the second percentile, we did have a record low at Revolution Creek, the automated snow weather station with 35 years of record. And then several other like Yellowhead and Hedrick Lake that weren't necessarily record low, but they were probably just maybe 10 to 15 millimeters of snow water equivalent away from record low. So extremely low levels there. Really, the risk for Prince George for flooding is about as low as it's ever been with these numbers. And of course, then that really leads to just the potentials for water supply challenges for the Prince George area and upstream, whether that's in the Robson Valley, the McGregor River, or over in the west side with Stewart Lake and Vanderhoof.
Follow up, Darren?
No, I think that covered it.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Jonathan, for being available and sharing your technical expertise. That concludes today's availability.